And that's enough wrath for any broadcaster. I will quote Gordon McLendon while we were in the break. He said, and I quote, "If we ever lose South Africa, that's the ball game."
Yes, and I'm going to say, I have no respect for apartheid. If we lose South Africa and its mineral deposits, we are in one hell of a mess.
The Soviet Union understands that very, very well, and a big part of their policy is aimed at doing just that, and they've got a tremendous number of helpers in this country.
All right, but like apartheid. As a matter of fact, I didn't believe in apartheid. I was in apartheid. I was in Southern segregation. I moved down from Baltimore. I was a 5-year-old kid from Baltimore in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I was one of these pain-in-the-neck kids who could read before the first grade. You know, little words here and, C-A-T. What is that one, Mommy? And I'd learn. And Mommy took me to the Woolworths basement. Oddly and historically enough, the very same Woolworths where many years later the first sit-in would occur. Remember 1956, the first sit-in? Black students sat at the lunch counter.
Greenville?
Greensboro.
Greensboro.
Yeah, come on, you're confusing culture with agriculture. Not Greenville, Greensboro. We are the cultural center.
1960?
1956. Students from A&T. Agriculture and Technical College was a black college. They sat in, coordinated by the NAACP, which was the bitterest accusation you could make. And the NAACP is coordinating the whole thing. That seemed to be the argument against it. Who cares? Of course they were. They wanted a breakthrough, and I'm glad they got it. So they found 5 black students who would go up to Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, and sit down and not get served and keep on sitting there, and it was great. And it made the sit-ins. But let's see, what year was that? 56? I'm talking about 1935. If you're good at algebra, you can tell how old I am because of the things I've let slip in the past 90 seconds. Anyhow, in 1935, my mother says to me, "Now, Barry, you stay right here and don't you go wandering around. I don't want to have to look for you. I don't want to have to call for you. You stand right here and don't you move." It was in the basement of Woolworth. And I'd just gotten down from Baltimore. And even though I was not in the first grade yet, I could read simple words. And Mother left me alone. And I stood there. And there was nothing exciting there. And I wandered toward the end of the corridor. And I saw 2 water fountains. I wasn't high enough to reach either one, but I was high enough to look at the action. I could read the words above each one. Above one water fountain, it said white. And above the other one, it said colored. I said, "Hot dog, I never seen colored water before. I hope somebody comes and turns on that one." But I figured the other one was white water. It was like ordinary water. And a number of people came. They happened to be white, but I didn't make the connection. They went to the white. I said, "Oh, shucks. Which one's he going to go to? Which one's he going to go to? Which one's he going to go to? Shucks, he's going to the white one again." Finally, a man came, happened to be black, but I didn't make the connection either. I went to the colored one. The colored water fountain. I said, "This is my moment. I'm going to see colored water for the first time." And he turned that thing, leaned down to take a drink, and it was the same kind of water that came out of the white fountain. I remember saying to myself, "Doggone, it's just my luck to get here on the day the thing's broke." It was the same colored water, so I didn't like apartheid from the first movie. But the American paralysis is against South Africa. And here's I can't ask a question as brilliant as Charles Wiley's. All ye who despise South Africa and will boycott South African products, why do you not also boycott Polish ham, Czechoslovak machine tool equipment, Romanian wine? What's the difference? If you don't like... I'm not putting this forward in South Africa's defense, but it is.
Good point, though.
Yeah, no. But I mean, if you're going to be against injustice someplace, how can you not be against injustice every place? How can you detest what the South Africans are doing in their black-white policy and not detest what the communists are doing in their everything-to-everybody policy? An outcast. Now, I would love to know if you subtract Soviet propaganda, if you subtract the Soviet influence from South Africa's ostracism, how much would you have left? Charles Wiley points out astutely that South Africa is a plum. South Africa is mineral rich. Gordon McLendon put it slightly differently. If we lose South Africa, the game's over. What is it they have again? Molybdenum or something?
No, they've got cobalt. No, there's almost death wish
aspect to our foreign policy, too, which relates to what we're talking about. In 1977, I had the misfortune of working for the government when the folks in power at that time gave consideration to embargoing South African minerals as a way of trying to enforce our own foreign policy goals. And this was at a time when we were simultaneously embargoing Rhodesian chrome, so that left one source of chromium for the United States if we had gone ahead with it. And it was a virtually impossible task to try to explain that in many respects we needed them more than they needed us.
Here comes Doug Ireland with that glint in his voice. Aha, I've got you now. 11 years before you gave that endorsement, Mr. Farber. Let the record show that Mr. Keel was chairman of Democrats. I've got you now trapped. I mean, can't you see it all? Abscam, Watergate, and Farber right there in the dock together.
I was praising your loyalty to an old friend, Derry. How could you take that amiss?
No, if Ted Keel were an old enemy and I lived in a city as embattled as New York, I would still say, hooray, come on in like the cavalry to the rescue. We need you. However, you haven't heard the last of it, Doug. Look at me. I mean, the Soho News is going to have to add extra pages if you're going to go after me. Theodore Keel, and there is a previous... let me tell you what liberals... Doug, let me tell you about liberals.
I wish you would, because you're one of the few people I know who's run both as the candidate of the Liberal Party in 1970 and then as the candidate of the Conservative Party for mayor in 1977. So I wish you would elucidate
Now,
me.
wait a minute. Hold it. I didn't realize that this show was going to start out with Barry Farber's wretched political biography. However, since Doug Ireland has turned it into a Farber festival...
Well, you started with a hagiography of our friend Brother Keel, so it's all right.
Like the Marines fought their way out from Chongjin Reservoir in Korea, let me fight my way out of the Doug Ireland Bermuda Triangle. In the background, this is news. Tanks are moving against rebels behind the Iron Curtain. Can you tell me where? Don't say Poland, you get an F. They're not moving in Poland. They are moving in a different communist country that you don't know about because the American press is so easy to fixate on one trouble spot. Can you believe that our country is so weak in newspaper talent that we can't concentrate on more than one trouble spot at a time? Keep your radio fixed right where it is. Are we lucky to have radio in addition to newspapers? We have the flexibility to concentrate on where tanks are moving against rebellious students behind the Iron Curtain. I will not keep you in torturous suspense. It is in Yugoslavia. There is an uprising of the Albanians. 3 uprisen Albanians are on my microphones, and we will tell the story now. Communism cosmically. There are 2 Albanias. You only know about one, and you don't care about that one. Just look at the map, and down there on the Adriatic, like a tick sticking off the neck of a dog, you'll see a little jelly bean of a country called Albania. There are 2 Albanias. That's one that you see on the map. Inside neighboring Yugoslavia, there is another Albania. 3 million. The Albania you see on the map has 3 million people. The Albania you don't see on the map, it's called Yugoslavia. They also have 3 million Albanians, and they cover about the same territory. Those Albanians in Yugoslavia are rising up. Tanks, police, sticks, gunfire, uprising. That's going on right now. My partners for the broadcast who can fill in where the American press has failed us are Luan Gashi, Luan Isuthi, an old friend of these microphones, Ramazan Tordio. Ramazan?
All the others are, as you know.
All right, so you have in Yugoslavia 8 nationalities. It's like trying to contain 8 tornadoes in one wet paper bag. You got Serbs, you got Croats, Macedonians, Montenegrins, Macedonians, Slovenians, Hungarians, and Albanians. 7 of them are quiet at the moment. The Albanians have risen up. Well, the Albanians in the south, Kosovo, Metohija, look at your map. They are rising up. 3 Albanian leaders in the studio right now are here to tell us about it, even though the rest of the newspapers of the Western world haven't heard about it themselves yet. Nationalism that counts. If you could unite with the Stalinist, the most totalitarian communist regime, which has got to be the... Albania makes Mao Zedong and Ho Chi Minh look like joint members of the Americans for Democratic Action.
But Barry, perhaps it's the other way around. The thing is, you know, that nationalism here is a cover for a certain urge of freedom. You see, they sort of, you know, people it is safer to think nowadays in nationalistic terms. And if those people, those Albanians within Yugoslavia, if they say, we want freedom, we don't want communism and so on, that would be tactically counterproductive. They will be immediately crushed to say, oh, you're against communism. You see, it is only an inhabitant of that system understands how dangerous it is to say, I am against socialism. You see, for an American, of course, it's not only easy, but socialism is a bad word, but there, if you say, oh, I am against socialism, that will mean that you're simply an outcast, that you are beyond the pale of human civilization, that you are a criminal by definition.
Hold it. There's only one place on the planet Earth where a third world nation borders a modern industrial nation. Where is it? I can see you getting your wife, take off her shoes, step up on the chair, pull down the gazetteer, dust it off, open it, look through Nepal, Bhutan, Abu Dhabi. The only place where a third world nation abuts, borders, a first world modern nation is right down that way, Mexico versus America. Mexico is a third world nation, America is a first world nation. It doesn't happen any other place on the planet Earth. Now, we're getting a big soldiers for Albanian freedom, whether that freedom is among the Albanians in Yugoslavia, in Albania, or in New York City. Gentlemen, stay in touch. Freedom fighters are my favorite people. Say thank you in your beautiful language to Falaminderit. Oh, yeah, man, fantastic. In Croatian, it's just Fala. That's not nearly as good.
We love Croatia.
That's somebody who says standing up to the Soviet Union is a plot against women, against children, against the third world, against peace. Do you know we made 28 calls today to our, remember that line in Casablanca? I think it was the last line, round up the usual suspects. Well, I called the usual leftists, and not one of them was around. I could not get anybody who feels a little kindness toward the Soviet Union or a little bit of antagonism against the Pentagon or against Ronald. I could not find an opponent to Lev Navrozov. Now, I'm going to have Lev on come anything short of outright Soviet invasion into this part of our broadcast operation.
There are disturbances, but the thing is, you know, that those disturbances do not mean the end or disintegration of the Soviet Empire or anything like that. Please remember that those disturbances are part of the game. In a way, they are premeditated. It is not that the Soviet regime evokes them on purpose, no. But the latitude that the Soviet regime gives is something deliberate. Why? Let us ask why. For example, let me give you several examples. For example, there are dissidents in Russia. Instead of arresting, let us say, 20,000 people and put an end to it, they sort of, you know, just pick those people one by one. They first try to browbeat them. They try to coax them into submission, to bribe them, to buy them, and so on. Or take, for example, Poland. Instead of coming there like a ton of bricks and annexing it and suppressing and wiping out all resistance, they have been very, very cautious. They have been walking around and sort of, you know, just making some signs and so on. Why that? Because, you understand, they have been doing that on purpose. They believe that they are strong enough to afford certain opposition, to afford certain disturbances. You understand, this is different because the Soviet regime's behavior is determined by their global strategy. They think what they should do in terms of global expansion. Should they annex Poland? No. Why? It's very simple. They have to conquer more countries, right? They have to keep countries that they have already conquered in check, like Czechoslovakia, with sort of, just as little forces there as possible. How they can do it? They can do it only by what I call the system of satrapies. In other words, the systems whereby each district is ruled by its own national elite. This, of course, leads to disturbances, because you understand the local national elite conspires with its own population because they speak one language, they have common interests, they have a common culture, and so on. But they make allowances for that on purpose, because in this way, they are future fifth columns in other countries to be conquered, like in France, Italy, and so on. They are more motivated to help their conquest. You see, very simple, just sort of, let me wrap it up, because the idea is new and it is not understood, very easily. The thing is, that their supporters in other countries must be motivated to help them. If they annex Poland, if they annex those territories, if they convert, want to be the ruling elites, the national ruling elites of their countries. And this is what the Soviet regime promises.
Oh, Lev, you were impressing us all after the microphones went off, as you always do while the microphones are on, with the way you have to lie to live in totalitarian countries. I understand this. A lot of Americans have to do this in private business, too. But at least it's voluntary. There you can always leave without getting an exit visa, and you don't even have to be Jewish. Now, in the Soviet Union, what is it you have to say to get what you want?
Yes, it's, I was commenting on those Albanians in the first part of the broadcast, and there was a certain communication break because they were not understood. They sounded very strange to a free person because they wanted some sort of something very strange. Actually, they acted within the logic of a totalitarian society. Albania and even Yugoslavia are totalitarian societies, and you can wish or you can express only certain wishes. And those wishes may sound very strange to you because you say, why such strange wishes? And here is, just my analogy. For example, you want to leave Russia. You say, sort of, you make this application. You're saying there, I love communism because it is certainly the best system in the world and the best possible system imaginable in any human imagination. I love the Soviet government because it consists of sages, virtuous people, and so on and so forth. In other words, you write several pages of flattery and so on. But you say, I am an architect. And as it happens, in Nebraska, they offer me a higher salary. And this is the only reason why I want to go to the United States. The only reason. Otherwise, communism suits me fine, and I will always have a warm corner for it. And I will go to Nebraska. I work there at a higher salary, but I will always say, that communism, so on and so forth. If you write something like that, if you submit an application like that, they'll say, that you are mad, that you are a criminal. And, just at the very best, an official, and there are very many sympathetic and likable officials. And, some lady will say, said, Ivan Petrovich or Comrade Ivanov, take this application, please, and never show it to anyone. And never come here, because you are in for trouble. And so on. That's what happens. What you're supposed to write as an application instead, this kind of thing, which is legitimate. Your motive is to go to Nebraska, to be an architect there, and get a higher salary, and to be a communist, to be a card-bearing communist in Nebraska. Instead, you write this. I am not Jewish, but I feel Jewish. Hereby, I request to permit me to go to my historic motherland, which is Israel. Best regards, Ivanov. And this is the form which they will take seriously. This is the form for which no one will, just harass you, or, they harass, but they harass you in terms of legitimacy. At least you are not an outright criminal. You did something that is allowed to do. In other words, human motivations there, they take certain legitimate channels which you may express and which may sound very strange to you, because you say, why this ethnic Russian, who is Ivanov, who is not Jewish, suddenly writes that he is not Jewish but feels Jewish and wants to go to Israel while he wants to go to Nebraska. And he will never go to Israel, he will go to Nebraska. But this is the form the motive there takes. And the same with those Albanians whose sort of, whose expression of their motives sounded so strange to you, understandably, because they acted in the legitimacy of those totalitarian societies.
Long ago, as a boy journalist, quit praising people merely because I liked them and they were here. My regular audience knows that I am following Poland as my second Hungary. I never got over the first Hungary. I don't apologize for it. I will never get over the thrill. I mean, the pure animal thrill, adrenaline splashing down over my liver of people rising up against tyranny. Whether it is the Norwegian underground, whether it is 18 able-bodied men overpowering the Nazi garrison on the west coast of Norway and never being heard about, unanimous, heavy-handed, perpetual reverence for Joseph Stalin. Did that affect your appetite? Did it affect your ability to sleep? Did you walk around with your mouths open in the Soviet Union that day?
Well, certainly it had nothing to do with me, because I had known it all along, and to me it was it was uninteresting even. And yes, it's sort of, just I was interested only in some sort of maneuvers of Khrushchev and his purposes behind it. We had known everything, meaning we sort of, just, of course, there was a spectrum of skepticism. Not all people were so skeptical or sophisticated as we, so to speak. But still, please scan the newsreels, the Soviet newsreels, which show the Soviet people after Stalin's death. You expect, and many authors and many journalists and many experts will tell you, that sort of, the Soviet people wept and they were shocked, and they some of them thought, that Stalin was immortal and they could not stand such a loss, and so on and so forth. Yes, there were such people, because in a society there are all kinds of people always, just there are people who weep on every pretext and so on, just it's, just there is statistical theory of small numbers which tell us, that in every large group there are always exceptions, just all kinds of people, and there were such people too who wept, because they would weep, just on any pretext. But if you look at the newsreels, you'll see total indifference. You'll see people absolutely with vacuous indifferent faces. Some of them trying to be sort of, serious as befitting the occasion. Stalin died, just you cannot smile, and so on and so forth. And so, but you understand that this is kind of, just pretense. It's sort of, it's official sorrow, so to speak. But even such people are few. Others are sort of curious, craning their necks, to see what is happening there. And most of them, it's the curiosity of an idle crowd. I scanned those newsreels for that specific purpose, to see the reaction, whether perhaps, just I'm so different and so unique and so unusual, that for me Stalin had been a tyrant and sort of, just a hated personality. You see, sort of, just, I didn't find a single face on that newsreel, not a single one, except those absolutely vacuous faces. Therefore, you see, the moral is that real feelings of any social group are concealed in a totalitarian society. The sort of, just the fact, that you see jubilating crowd, just hailing Stalin and so on and so forth, and people shouting hysterically, that fact doesn't mean a damn thing. When I was shown, for example, China is the country that, of course, just to which I am an outsider. But when I was shown a big photograph with people shouting, hailing, great Mao, and they said, what are their feelings, what they're thinking about? And I said, they're thinking about getting a spare pair of socks. That's their feeling.
Lev, what do you think?
There are two basic motives. Oh, and those two motives are sort of in every person to different extent. Just in some of them, one motive predominates completely. And in others, the other motives. The two motives are, one motive is antagonistic to the Soviet rulers. And whatever happens, what is unpleasant to them, is good enough. So, no matter what, that's good, that's the more trouble they have anywhere, no matter what trouble is that. Sometimes this attitude absolutely nihilistic. They would sort of, they would hail a hurricane, just a flood, just anything, something in which they will even perish. But sort of, to spite the rulers. That's one motive. The other motive, the motive prevalent in ethnic Russians, in some ethnic Russians, I'm not speaking about the degrees, this is a complex problem. But the other motive is the feeling of the master race. In other words, the feeling that we Russians are going to dominate the world, that we are the chosen people, that we are better than anyone else, and the world will be ours. This is a natural feeling. Some Russians are hurt, just here in immigration, ethnic Russians. But I say, the Germans were the same. This is kind of, just typical of any nation. Just it is no disparagement, just on Russians as against Germans or against any nation. Any nation is tempted. Of course, just you Americans have no possibility, just to conquer the world, because if you conquer Mexico, you have so many welfare recipients, that you curse the day, just when you did that. You cannot, because of the intrinsic American structure, you cannot do that. But if a nation has this kind of possibility, there is a certain section of population, there is a certain motive, pride, just in conquest and so on. Those people, they are displeased by the trouble of Poland, and they want it suppressed, and they want sort of, just the kind of that we, meaning, the master race, dominated the world and so on.
Uprising against tyranny thrills me, and I have never seen the Polish, I remember before World War II we called it the Polish question. I've never seen the Polish question as brilliantly handled as between covers of your magazine, Geo. Where is this thing? This has got to go in some Freedom Museum right here. I'm talking about the issue of Geo, which doesn't even pretend to be a political magazine, April 1981.
It's out on the stands right now as we speak.
And these pictures of Poland prove the Chinese adage that one picture is worth 10,000 words. I just want to read one little part of this on page. This doesn't take courage, really. This is a free country, and you can do this kind of thing. But considering how seldom it's done by American magazines, and I got to say it takes courage. Now, here is a picture of poverty, which is usually seen in Mississippi. Well, Mississippi poverty makes this look like the Taj Mahal with well-kept grounds and gardens, okay? And here is what it says in Geo magazine on page 78. Here is what 35 years of socialism have done for the sick and the old, said a Catholic priest who went to visit this ailing woman at a farm 40 miles from Warsaw. Her sick bed is made of straw. Her cat's body heat is thin comfort against winter drafts, and professional medical assistance is difficult to obtain. How different from what we have been told by so-called American objective journalists over the past 35 years. A deterrent network. Our whole defense system is geared toward defense. We just don't have the means to thrust across Europe. Our tanks are tin cans compared to theirs. We are obvious. No, if a referee were to come down from another planet and mediate the quarrel on the planet Earth. That referee would know one thing right away. One side, namely our side, is interested only in defense, and the other side is interested in defense plus attack, judging from the defense capabilities. Now, the Strategic Air Command, American Western movie, the good guy always shoots last. The bad guy draws and shoots first, and the good guy then draws and finishes. And the good guy draw last and shoot last and survive in the nuclear age. And he could also do other, does our triumph in space now signal to the Russians, be careful, don't mistake our niceness for dumbness, don't mistake our niceness for weakness. We are still capable, we're more capable than you are, we're not out of surprises, we're not that old a dog, new tricks are not that tough for us. Does the success, even though the space shuttle is not a logical defensive weapon or a place to launch defensive weapons from, does the mere fact that we could do what we did signal to the Russians that they had better straighten their neckties and smile and show a little respect in the world because we are still we? Lev Navrozov, the most valuable person ever to, I think my grandparents are an exception. My grandparents accepted Lev Navrozov as the most valuable person who ever left the territory of what we loosely call Russia and came to the territory of the United States of America. He has written widely in too many journals, too many books, too many important pieces for me to give a bibliography of right now, but I think the most important thing he ever did, apart from writing, is found an organization. Shame on us for waiting till Lev Navrozov got here to do it. He founded an organization, and just to show you what an organization is, later on I'll drop a few of the multi-megaton names from his letterhead, from his board of directors. Formed an organization called the Center for the Survival of Western Democracies. The title is The Russians Are Not Coming, and the whole point of the article is all this flapdoodle about the Soviet military buildup is a stage show. It's merely a sham. It's just the smoke from dried sassafras root designed to melt our brains and spend unnecessary billions to enrich our weapons manufacturers. House Magazine, the March edition of 1981, The Russians Are Not Coming, giving the impression that Russia is so weak and harmless and pussycat that only a war criminal desiring to line his pockets with millions of dollars, billions of taxpayers' money, could pretend that there is something that we call a Soviet threat.
You called it a scholarly-looking article, Lev, but here's a line that I don't know if there's anybody in this country that can agree with it. Yet it is not we, meaning the United States, but the Soviets who have suffered a decline of influence in both hemispheres, and most of their losses have been our gains. Is there anybody today in their right minds that could say that the United States has gained and the Soviet Union has lost in the world in the last few years?
But what I meant
realistically,
I meant, that it's scholarly language, not its scholarly meaning. It's unscholarly. That American foreign policy has been inconsistent, to put it mildly, and it has been, in my opinion, it has been inane. Therefore, it is very easy somehow to say that there is no threat by quoting the people, let's say, of 40 or 20 or 10 years ago, and it will be sort of clear, that they were somehow overstating things and so on. And this is what he is doing. The thing is, that the Soviet threat has been increasing. It has been increasing very slowly. It took decades, and this is the difference between Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany. And the author takes advantage of that because he quotes those people like President Truman, for example, who said, well, the Soviet threat and so on, exaggerating rather, because, of course, the Western media and Western academics are prone to exaggeration sometimes, and he takes advantage of that very cleverly, because he said, well, they said 20 and 30 years ago, the Soviet threat, the Soviet world conquest, and nothing has happened. You see, in other words, he plays that parable, which is in English, I suppose, what is it in English? To cry wolf. Cry a wolf. Yeah, exactly. He said, well, they cried a wolf 10 and 20 years ago, and nothing has happened.
But they also
Not conquered.
had policies of containment. They also had stronger foreign policies. They also had a blockade of Cuba when they thought it was necessary.
Incidentally, that evokes the very title. The Russians are not coming. They are not coming to the United States because there is no need to. The Soviet regime can simply take over Europe, Asia, except China, and Africa, to be in such a military position of preponderance that the United States will have only to surrender. That's all. Therefore, that's precisely as you said. He neglects to say that the Soviets always could operate with their ground forces without any just nuclear weapons and God knows what weapons and forces and counter forces and strikes and counter strikes and all that. It's the simple fact it is within the grasp of a child. The Soviet ground troops, ordinary ground troops, ordinary tanks, ordinary guerrillas, ordinary ground troops can, and as a matter of fact, they could overrun Europe in the 50s. But the whole trick is that in the 50s there was an American deterrent. I mean. There was an American deterrent in the 50s. There is none now. And this is the situation if put into a nutshell.
The thing, you've seen his articles in magazines like Commentary and Midstream. His book, The Education of Lev Navrozov, should be book number 001. If you want to skip through the irrelevant past of communism and get to the very relevant present, early in round one, The Education of Lev Navrozov. Written in English, smuggled out of the Soviet Union in microfilm, followed by the smuggling out of Lev Navrozov in a very interesting way, which we'll get to on another. About every 5 times Lev is here, I like him to tell the story of his own incredible accidental release from Soviet Russia.
About the Soviet regime. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, there is no gross national product in the Soviet regime, contrary to the CIA and other institutions. Everything goes to military production if military production wants it. In other words, it takes all priority. To civilian production goes only what is left over. Therefore, you cannot calculate it in terms as it is calculated in the United States.
But still, even the way it's calculated.
Yes, I won't accept a lesser figure than 100%. But what I'm saying is that if a defective product goes into civilian production, it has no market value. You understand? Imagine in the United States that civilian production would take only what is defective, what is no good for military production. It will have no market value. It's some defective aluminum, for example.
The point,
because in the United States, on the contrary, it is often what is defective, what is no good for civilian production, goes into military production. In other words, the whole pattern is neatly reversed. You understand? This is why I protest against those estimates, just of 5% against 40%. You understand? Here, for example, let us say a Soviet engineer. He is a drunkard. He is no good for military production. So he goes into civilian production. In the United States, it's vice versa. If a person has been rejected by civilian production, where the pay is high, he goes into military production, and then those helicopters fall down.
So good. I want to hand it out to everybody so you can break up dinner parties that deserve to be broken up. Dinner parties where people say, well, America brought it on itself in Iran. I mean, look what the CIA did to monkey around in Iran's internal affairs. No wonder those people finally exercised their vengeance upon us when they got rid of the Lev Navrozov to the rescue intellectually. Whatever the CIA did in Iran, the Soviets did the same thing. Russia supported this.
Yes, and you see, there is a book of censorship at every publishing house in Russia. In that book...
A book of censorship?
Yes, it's a book which indicates, so even before the censor, that you should know what you can write and what you cannot. And there are don'ts in that book. For example, you could not, because it's already past time, you could not mention the Shah
or his regime unfavorably in any context at all. You could not mention poverty in Iran. You could not mention repression in Iran. Nothing at all. Nothing derogatory, unfavorable, or anything like that. So the Soviet regime supported the Shah while the Shah was in power. And of that, the Soviet regime is at least as guilty, quote unquote, as the United States. But apart from that, the Soviets invaded something like 50 million Muslims on the former territory of Russia. They occupied the territory. Do you know that the word mullah, ask every Soviet child, what is mullah? And he'll say that mullah is the worst criminal, by definition. Our childhood was filled with stories about the extermination of mullahs. Do you know that?
No.
Mullah is a sort of, it's a ready-made criminal. It's sort of, it is criminal by definition, who must be sought and destroyed as a pernicious insect. This is what we read in childhood.
In the Soviet Union.
In the Soviet Union.
Mullahs, incidentally, in case people joined the 20th century late, they are, of course, you could have joined the 8th century late,
yes.
still had mullah.
They are Muslim clergy.
Yeah, right.
And we have heard, for example, Ayatollah Khomeini would have been shot, not because of any transgressions, but he would have been shot because he was a Muslim mullah. Mm-hmm. In other words, the entire clergy was exterminated ruthlessly and was replaced by some token sort of mullahs who now receive, foreigners and so on and so forth. In other words, Muslim religion as an independent entity was wiped out completely
in the Soviet. In other words, if I go to a part of the Soviet Union where some of the Soviet Union's 50 million Muslims live, and I say, I'm an American, I'm a newspaper person, I have a big deal radio show, I want to see some of your Muslim institutions, your Muslim mosques, I want to meet some of your Muslim clergymen, they would have somebody to show me.
Yes, they will have token institutions, they will have everything. Just as you go to Moscow and say, I want to see a Jewish magazine in Hebrew. They say, well, of course, just who is going of suppressing, great Jewish culture? And they will introduce you to the famous editor. His name is well known, Vergilis.
Yeah.
Vergilis is the editor of a Jewish magazine in Hebrew. And some token periodical in Hebrew. They have everything to show, all this. Just as they had, just a model concentration camp to show, just during Stalin. And don't you know that they showed it to Mrs. Roosevelt when she came to Russia? She was shown, just a model concentration camp where sort of, just those inmates worked and were educated and so on and so forth. And it was something that the American prison system was to emulate, according to Mrs. Roosevelt. So they destroyed Muslim religion. Mm-hmm. That's number two. Then they invaded Afghanistan. They are using, chemical weapons against Muslims. Just compare that to the American support of the Shah, who was supported by the Soviet regime too. Just as well.
They say that Russia has no military designs on the rest of the world. I say, how would you explain that to the Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, the Poles, and I go all through Eastern Europe, and the Afghans, and et cetera. And they say, oh, but these, don't you understand, these are in Russia's security zone. Russia feels insecure. Russia has frequently been invaded by the outside world. These are immediately important to Soviet internal security. They don't want to take any territory. They just want to protect their own, like we would if Mexico were an enemy.
He's discussing the motives. Mm-hmm. And the motives of world conquest may be many.
What about Cuba?
They can, yes, but it can be
in the Soviet sphere. It's right next door to the Soviet.
You see, this is also possible. Insecurity is one of human motives,
And it may be argued that a bank robber robs a bank because he feels insecure. This is a common statement. Of course, they will feel more secure if the world is theirs. This is natural that they feel insecure. You know, every society which is different in this way from other societies feels insecure. The existence of the United States, you know, free, rich, you know, successful, and so on, of course, you know, adds to the sense of insecurity. Naturally, they want to destroy this hotbed of sedition, dreams, hopes, and so on and so forth. So what? He's discussing the motives. It's like discussing the motive of a criminal who is robbing a bank. Of course, his motives are many and few. He might feel insecure. He might be reckless. He relishes sort of, you know, just adventure. He's suicidal, and so on and so forth. But so what? The fact remains that they want the world. The author of the article will never say that they will stop somewhere. That they say, oh, look, Cuba is the last limit. Then they will stop. Because we have heard it every 10 years.
But the point is, however they want to do it.
They say it in their coded language, which we know from childhood. They say, for example, you can find it in Pravda anywhere, the ultimate triumph of our cause. Very decent, isn't it?
Oh,
no war.
Everybody knows what the ultimate triumph is because Stalin delineated it, Lenin delineated it.
Yes, of course. They never use words. World domination, Soviet world conquest, war, and so on. When they invaded Czechoslovakia, do you know how it was defined? Officially. Not as some sort of poetic flight of imagination of some journalist. No. The official definition is the extension of a hand of fraternal help to Czechoslovakia. This is an official definition. There was no invasion. According to Soviet propaganda, according to Pravda, the Soviet regime has never been engaged in any invasion, war of aggression, subversion, just world conquest designs, anything like that. They have a code language for every event.
When I got off the train in Moscow, the first and only time I went there in 1956, there was a tremendous banner, the size of an American apartment house, greeting you when you walk out of the train station. Worker with a clenched fist and a hammer and sickle. And the sign, the words read, Period k pobjedu komunizmu vo всем мире. When we get back to get me, Lev Navrozov.
Well, it means forward to the victory of communism all over the world. And the code word here is communism. Because by communism, Soviet propaganda means not, for example, Czechoslovak communism. Czechoslovak communism was suppressed by tanks, as we know, in 1968. By communism is meant only the power of the Soviet rulers, only. Already Chinese communism is no communism. It's and so on and so forth. Any deviation from the Soviet rulers' power is not communism. And sometimes it is even worse than so-called capitalism. And it's sort of also, just some sort of labels are attached like, revanchism, fascism, and whatnot, as it was, for example, in Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was to attack, with the help of West Germany, Russia. And therefore, the Soviet regime had to sort of, just to prevent in the nick of time, this terrible invasion of Russia on the part of Czechoslovakia. So you understand, this is a code phrase which plainly means our forward to our power throughout the world.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, would that sign still be up in Moscow, or has there been enough détente and peaceful code?
No, that sign has always been and will be. Because, you see, those code phrases, they can use ambiguously. If you say, but look, isn't it, practically it means forward to Soviet world conquest. They'll say, oh no, first of all, we have never conquered anyone. You see, we extended a fraternal hand of help to Czechoslovakia. We extended a fraternal help to Afghanistan. Therefore, it is simply not true. They will explain that historically, in every country, there originates sort of the progressive trend toward communism. And sometimes there are reactionary forces, fascists and conservatives and so on, who want to suppress it. So the Soviet rulers have to extend the fraternal help, as it was in Czechoslovakia.
As you pointed out, I think, again, for the millionth time, that the only people who practiced détente during détente was the United States. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, was busy extending its hand of fraternal friendship in various places around the world.
Naturally, because
and building up their forces.
Well, because the United States believe in agreements, since this is a society based on agreements. You understand? You sort of, you make a contract, and you live happily ever after, abiding by it, and sort of, contributing to each other, and so on. Therefore, this ingrained concept of contract is so deep in the American mind that they think, all right, they believed, people like Henry Kissinger, they believed that, or wanted to believe that the Soviet global war regime is something like General Motors. And you make a contract, and why should we frighten each other? Why should we spend and so on and so forth? But this is not their mentality. Nothing is based on contract in Russia.
I think one of the things is a clear-cut violation of human nature, even when it wins. As you point out, theoretically, Russia would be delighted to have Marxist regimes in Yugoslavia, Albania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, each adapted to its own. But unless it's Soviet power, they don't want to play. They want to replace it. Do we do in a free country to pick up our sledgehammer and break those Soviet chains around the ankles of our free American journalists? Maybe these now third and fourth after Lenin generation Soviet leaders will say, who needs the war? Let's build bigger dachas on the Black Sea and have fun.
That they are going to do. But at the same time, you understand, they have been, contrary to the author of this article, so fantastically successful in the military field that it is by definition that every society does what it does best. Just think of it. They, within a matter of hours, they occupied Czechoslovakia, a Western country with old Western traditions, and they did it within a matter of hours and have been holding the country ever since without any trouble, except, for some poor writer, who would be dragged, just to Siberia. That's all the trouble they had. It's a tremendous success and efficiency in military conquests, assimilations, digestions. And those people who would, I assure you, will build, villas on the Black Sea, that part perhaps will develop. But at the same time, you see the attraction of power and the possibility of it is so great that the temptation cannot be resisted. That's what they have been doing well. Exactly. When the thing is done, when the world empire is theirs, then there will be harems and there will be sort of, something, there will be luxury, luxury on a scale that we cannot imagine. Then there will be sort of, just corruption, the corruption of Rome and Byzantium, and all corrupt periods of history will combine. That will be different. And that will be when the job has been done, exactly. Now it is not done. They feel insecure. They can lose everything overnight. In other words, it is that, in my experience, a friend of mine, Ray Anderson of the New York Times, who was in Moscow, he was suddenly thrown out because, you see, he hobnobbed too much with us. In general, correspondents were allowed to communicate with dissidents, but there is a certain elusive limit which was one not supposed to transcend. And he did, and he was kicked out, and that was the end of his career. Actually, he's now somewhere on the desk, and it's sort of, it's the end of it. All right.
Well, that goes.
The whole system of reportage from Moscow is obsolete. It is simply it's a hoax. It is based on the old premise that a correspondent goes to the capital of a certain country and reports and so on, but it doesn't work in a totalitarian society because the correspondent is in a cage. Even psychologically, he is he's captured, so to speak. He's a hostage. Please. For example, well, I'm an expert on the New York Times, therefore, I can speak authoritatively on that newspaper only. But never has been any report on military preparations in Russia. No, not in Russia, in Moscow even. Here is, for example, the Likhachov plant in Moscow. It is within a walking distance from where the correspondents live. Now, what is the Likhachov plant? This is a famous plant where cars are produced, allegedly. Actually, it's a military plant. You see, it's just inside that civilian plant, there is a military plant. And this is very interesting, because it shows that Soviet enterprises are just two double affairs. They have military plants within civilian plants. You can imagine what consequences that have. Just all those nicely looking plants producing allegedly motorcycles, bicycles, cars, and so on. They actually produced rockets and just the so-called combat vehicles, the famous Soviet weapon. I think, just the weapon of the future conquest, actually, and so on and so forth. But it has never been reported because every correspondent knows, even perhaps subconsciously, that if he does that, he may really be charged with espionage and sent to Siberia, not to New York. And the most important aspect of the Soviet regime, its military preparedness. It's you see, the Soviet regime is a military camp under the veneer of civilian, production, festivities, activities, and so on and so forth. And no one has broken through that veneer. It's, I'm saying something like this. It's like visiting, let us say, an armored division and reporting how, just girls dance at a local, club of that division without noticing the fact that the whole thing is a military establishment. And the same applies to Russia. The fact, I have read every word of Hedrick Smith's Russians, every word of that book. There is not a hint at this at these military preparations behind the scenes. Actually, a foreign correspondent in Moscow, when he is in that cage, feels psychologically, perhaps even subconsciously, just as a Soviet inhabitant. Have you witnessed sometimes, it's on television, on Swedish television, on American television, those interviews in Moscow with Soviet inhabitants? Something like, the Soviet inhabitants are invited to say what he thinks about peace, let us say. And, that guy says, oh, I believe in peace, and peace will prevail if all good fellows of the world get together, and so on. Just that line. Of course, he's not free. It's obvious that this is an act. But the thing is that a foreign correspondent begins also to act in a much the same way. He becomes just a second personality. He develops the same sense of self-censorship that a Soviet inhabitant says. The whole thing becomes phony. He feels, for example, that he cannot touch on any military subject. This is a taboo. So he begins to talk without mentioning, as they say, just the rope in the home of the hanged. In other words, the most important thing about the Soviet regime, its intense military operations behind the scenes, are left out of his mind, are screened out of his consciousness. he becomes very much a Soviet inhabitant. And I watched it, sort of, we are all human after all, and it's quite natural that, just as Barry described, very, very graphically, how he's ushered into that imperial, office and so on. He feels already that he's in a huge cage, that the power is ominous, awesome, and after all, what is he? All right, if he is destroyed, all right, there will be some protest. The President of the United States will say that if this continues, there will be no detente, something like that. That will be the end of it.
Yeah. So he's worried about freedom in America and in every other democracy, so worried he founded an organization. And Lev, I think now is the time for you to read the names of some of the people on your letterhead. Let me do it for you. This is the letterhead of Lev Navrozov's organization, Center for the Survival of Western Democracies. Be sure and put the S on, because we are still lucky enough to have plural democracies. We are not just one anymore. Rather, we are not down to one yet. We are about 18. The United Nations has about 154 membership dictatorships. Okay, Dr. Sidney Hook, Eugene Ionesco, Dr. Russell Kirk, Claire Booth Luce, Mikhailo Mikhailov, the great Yugoslav dissident, Malcolm Muggeridge, these are explosive names, Albert Shanker, Dr. Edward Teller, Dr. Albert Weeks. Lev Navrozov, of course, is a founder of the Center for the Survival of Western Democracies.
Let us ask ourselves, why is it that the Soviet regime, so fantastically powerful, able to overrun the whole of Europe within something like 20 days without much resistance, sort of stopped before Poland, before some workers without wrenches, as you, Barry, put it? Of course, the tempting theory is to say, well, this is the power of human courage and human determination, and even tyrants have to to step back and so on and so forth. Well, unfortunately, I do not subscribe to this romanticism. The thing is that the Soviet regime has not suppressed Poland so far, and as a matter of fact, allowed those disturbances to take place, precisely because it is sufficiently powerful to permit that. Now, what is the purpose of permission? What is the purpose of that? The purpose is that so far the Soviet world empire has not yet been built. In the building of it, internal groups within different countries are to help the Soviet regime. In other words, when, to use my expression, or to use rather Pravda's expression, when the Soviets extend their fraternal help, there must be the fifth column within each country to take that hand. These fifth columns are all kinds of communist parties, pro-Soviet parties. Let's not use the word communism in vain, because there might be different communists or honest communists listening to us, and so that we do not want to insult them. But there are pro-Soviet groups. These pro-Soviet groups are interested in a certain latitude, in a certain degree of independence after the Soviet takeover. And by unwilling to suppress Poland, by permitting those disturbances, the Soviets want to show those internal groups in France, Italy, and other countries that they won't be suppressive when the Soviet world empire has been built. This is actually deception. When the Soviet empire has been built, they will come down like a ton of bricks on any country, and there will be nothing of those, just poor fifth columnists who took that, just friend of their, the hand of their fraternal help. But actually now they won't, because if they go, if they suppress Poland, if they establish in Poland simply a Soviet province, just like the Ukraine, without any nonsense, then the groups within France, within Italy, within the United States won't be interested. They say, what's the point of becoming a Soviet colony if we are destroyed, if we are wiped out, and it will be simply a Soviet province? That that Polish, just pro-Soviet group would be independent and the same, it would be quiet and so on. But they permitted it, just as they permitted open dissidents in Russia.
For how long? That's the whole problem. For how long?
Remember that, contrary, incidentally, to the author of this article, the Soviets also hesitated before the invasion of Hungary and the invasion of Czechoslovakia. They also sort of, just weighed cons and pros, and finally they decided, no, it tips the scale, it gets out of hand. The same with Afghanistan, incidentally. They had their fifth column there, they had their colony, and they hesitated whether they should enter. And when they understood that the thing was getting out of hand, they went in. The same in Poland. When they realized that the thing is getting out of control, it's too dangerous, they would go in. But they have been always unwilling to do that because in their prospective global empire, they want those groups, they want the American Communist Party to sympathize with them, to sort of understand that if the United States becomes Soviet, it won't be just a Soviet province. No, it will be a more or less separate Poland, so to speak, with that Communist Party in power. It's a clever strategy of the empire state building, and incidentally, it is as old as history. It is not for the first time, but all historic empire builders, always, even Genghis Khan, for example, who was thought to be a very ruthless invader of the 13th century, even they allowed for certain independence of their satrapies in order to demonstrate to potential satrapies that they will enjoy sort of, the
Commonwealth.
Yes, that they will have some degree of independence and so on. By the same token, they do not suppress all dissidents. They could, my God, they could arrest, let's say 20,000 people, and there would be no dissidents in Russia.
Yeah, hold it. I was always wondering why they
always ally with different people. They are nice to people which they do not antagonize at the moment. The classical case, the best case, is the new economic policy in the 20s. In 1921, they suddenly announced that all those exploiters, capitalists, money bags, bloodsuckers should go back and should start their businesses. And they were nice to them for 7 years. For 7 years, it was a complete capitalist paradise. There were goods and services. Markets flourished. Everything was all right. And they were very nice to those people. And Bukharin, Lenin's henchman, wrote something about rich farmers, that some rich farmers of a certain place in Russia raised more pigs than farmers of Iowa in the United States. So it was a matter of pride, that some Soviet capitalists were so enterprising and did better than their American counterparts. Then those people were all grabbed. They were put into torture chambers where they were kept without water. They were given salty food, herring, in order that they confessed all their money, all their hoardings, all their savings, the number of their checkbooks, and so on and so forth. Every kopeck, or every penny, to use the American coin, was taken from those people, and they were all destroyed. And that's all, and that was the end of it. But for 7 years, they were very nice to them because they were allies. You see, it's a sudden shift of tactic. They are now sort of allied with first of all, they are nice to the population of Russia compared with Stalin. because they want them on their side. Number one. Number two, they want to show the prospective invaded nations that they won't be all dragged, to prisons and to Siberia and so on, that they will have a great deal of freedom. Well, unless you write something against the regime, you're sort of, just free. You're safe in Russia. Just don't write anything against the regime. Don't talk against the regime. Be loyal, and you're safe. So they want, in their perspective world, empire building, they want to show those prospective conquered nations that, for God's sake, just you have free medical aid, you have this and that, and at the same time, you will be safe. It won't be, just massacre as under Stalin, Therefore, it is all strategy which is very volatile. And I disagree with some so-called conservative and right-wing professors who say that the Soviet world empire will look like just like Eastern Europe today. It will be sort of, just simply hegemony of Soviet hegemony over states and so on. That is not true. When the world is theirs, they will destroy all independence, all opposition. It will be a terrible place to live in when they are in power all over the world, because there will be no incentive for them to be nice.
There are some people who value their freedom, or some nations that value their freedom a lot more than in others. The Soviets, it wouldn't be a piece of cake no matter what they tried to do, because we've been too free. We've grown up being very free. We've grown up being able to yell at the President of the United States and call him all sorts of names.
That's why my projection is that 3/4 of the American population will be exterminated.
Gary ought to get a prize for quiescence and being an obedient. I think Bulgaria. I think we all should stop and stand up and applaud Bulgaria. They've been the most obedient satellite the Soviet Union ever had. These peoples begin to get hope again. For years, they hoped America would liberate them, and then they gave up, and they just kept on giving up as we got more and more breathtakingly weak, unwilling, and almost like kids on pot, unaware that there were people around the world enslaved who had counted on us, or whose bigger brothers or whose fathers counted on us. So then once we begin to activate again on behalf of freedom, then these peoples will get a little more energetic, and then the Soviet Union will have an awful lot more to fear. So by allowing this business in Poland, by allowing an occasional Romanian writer to criticize the Soviet Union, aren't they really keeping themselves a little too loose? Isn't their seatbelt a little too loose for what is going to come at them when these peoples are not quiescent? The Polish worker arose against a background of total depression and quiescence. What if there were an uprising in a Poland or Romania or a Soviet Russia against the background of hot dog, we got America leading the free world again?
Barry, let me answer you with Stalin's words, which were private and which were reported by my neighbor. Once Stalin entered a conference hall, and there was a writer named Verta who sat. So Verta jumped up to give the chair to Stalin, and Stalin said words which almost destroyed Verta, but which were rather enigmatic. Stalin said, "Verta, don't worry about me. You'd better worry about yourself." So, just, Barry, don't worry about the Soviet rulers. They know that things are under control. If they were not, they would have suppressed Poland long ago. They know exactly what they can afford. And they know when it's sort of, they are playing with a kitten. If things get worse, if things get out of hand, they will be there with their tremendous power, and they'll simply crush Poland, just like, you can give me the metaphor better than I.
Right. Shelley and I have grown up in a different world. You grew up under Joseph Stalin in Soviet Russia. Shelley and I grew up with all kinds of people who should know better. Dumb, successful people. America is the world's capital of dumb, successful people. Well, we manufacture dumb, successful people like the Soviet Union manufactures Kalashnikov rifles. Free societies do that. So here you have a woman who's a movie star, and she's politically dumb. Here you have one who's sexy, and she's politically dumb. Here you have a great fiction writer, and he's politically dumb. But these dumb people all get together, and they say, well, what's wrong? Truman was really the aggressor. I mean, to build NATO as a direct dagger, and I mean, of course the Soviet Union is. What do you mean the Russians want land? Don't the Russians have enough land? We have had people taking the Soviet side of their own free will and volition because they were sexy, successful, rich, but very dumb. Now, in one stroke, if Russia were to do that to Poland, we would go right back to 1947, 001, where every American, however sexy, however rich, however dumb, would realize. Hold. If you were to do that, then all these dumb, sexy, successful people who Shelley and I have been trying to awaken over the past 20, 25, 30 years, they would come to us, they would line up in front of Sheldon Engelmeyer's typewriter, they would line up in front of my microphone, they would burn dried sassafras root, they'd approach on bended knee, they would beg for forgiveness, they would apologize for their stupidity all over the world.
Yeah, that also includes the...
But at the same time, if they do it, nothing much happens. They can afford it. They are unwilling. Of course, they lose, just in prestige and this and that, and their potential empire, world empire building. That's why they are unwilling to do it. But they can do it. They can do it. Remember that every outrage they perpetrated was first incredible. Look, here is the city of Immanuel Kant, Königsberg. Immanuel Kant is a sort of, it's a symbol of Western civilization. His critique of pure reason is sort of the basis of it. They took the city and they rename it. And the whole thing, just disappears. They make it simply their district. There is no Königsberg. It disappeared off the maps.
Kaliningrad?
Yes, Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad, the city of the pillar of Western civilization, is named after some second-rate Kremlin bureaucrat who was never taken seriously even by children when he was alive and was called Grandpa Kalinin. Now, the next outrage, then Poland, for example. Poland, just Warsaw. This is the country of Copernicus. Copernicus lived before the word America existed. It's also a kind of, just a monument to Western civilization. It has taken over. Then Hungary. The outrage is great because that was a communist country. And people said, but for God's sake, this is not a capitalist society. They are invading a communist country. So there was a great outrage. Then it was quiet. Then in Czechoslovakia it was different. You remember that in Hungary there were two social democrats that were admitted to the government. So people say, aha, you see, this is why they invaded. Two social democrats were admitted to the government. Oh, how terrible. Now in Czechoslovakia, not a single social democrat was admitted to the government. They were all pure, bona fide, 100% communist workers and so on. They would grace every questionnaire in the Kremlin ranks. They were invaded. And here comes Kissinger with detente and with all kinds of things just next year. It took the West 1 year to be indignant. We watched all the radio. We watched every day. So we knew, just what it was worth. In a year, it was all over. Yes, first it was indignation, it was unprecedented, and so on. Czechoslovakia, it was never part of Russia. It is the heart of mid-Europe. It has the oldest university in mid-Europe. This is also sort of, just part of the West. This is not the Ukraine. This is not Kazakhstan. This is not Tataria. This is the real West. And it was invaded. And in a year it was forgotten. I assure you, than Afghanistan. Afghanistan was different. Why? Because they said, all right, just after the war, on the crest of their sort of, victory, they invaded Europe. Or it happened before the previous invaders, whenever they sort of, just defeated the enemy, they would grab, though Russia, for example, when it defeated Napoleon, it never grabbed half of Europe. It was in Paris. The Russian Cossacks went through Paris, but Paris remained Paris. But anyway, it was also rationalized. Wow, just on the crest of victory, they grabbed half of Europe and so on. And then comes Afghanistan, which had nothing to do with the case. And it is invaded openly, sort of classically, and shown on television screens. Well, there was an indignation, and Carter said, that he cannot believe, and so on and so on. All that stuff. And France went with trade agreements with Russia. Germany signed trade agreements with the Soviet regime. Britain, of course, followed suit. Nothing happened. Nothing. Except that Prime Minister of Britain, Thatcher, said sort of, just that this is, that she's indignant. That's all. The same, they know that. Of course they are unwilling. Of course they know, just they don't want to disturb, to rock the boat. They have been receiving technology and science and credits from the West at the rate of several billion dollars a year. They don't want to rock that boat. It's very nice for them. But if they do that, unfortunately, nothing will happen.
I see, but the problem is that eventually...
Because, as you know, Hitler never expected that Britain would go to war with Germany because of Poland. That was ridiculous, because Britain gave away Czechoslovakia, and the rejoicing in the columns of the New York Times, which I read, just word for word, is absolutely tremendous. Do you know that a report of the New York Times from London, when Czechoslovakia was given away to Hitler, reads, "Women hysterical with joy. English women hysterical with joy that peace has been achieved, just in their minds, because Czechoslovakia was given away." So after that rejoicing, Hitler invades Poland, expecting that there will be, if not rejoicing, then neutrality, and suddenly England, contrary to all predictions and contrary to any logic, declares war. So it's brinkmanship. They always risk that, just we don't know.
But more importantly, what
They're growing up with a Boy Scout attitude that Russian propagandists ought to be ashamed of themselves. We go over there and they manage to manipulate unskilled American reporters away from the real condition of Soviet life. The reporters come, the Russians know the real story, they give Americans a phony story. That's a shameful thing to do. And then it occurred to me something Lev said earlier on a previous broadcast, that it's negative, reversed. In Russia, the public is private, and like somebody who would be a big private corporate giant over here would be a big powerful bureaucrat over there working for the advancement of the state, not for his stockholders and his personal wealth. It occurs to me this. An American public relations person, if his factory had some shameful thing, and he succeeded in having the press come, have coffee, look at the pretty girls, notice the game room, the new swimming pool, the bowling league, the free French classes, and then leave without ever seeing or ever really energetically trying to get to the shameful, polluting spewage that they're dumping into the river, he would not be ashamed. He'd be proud. So maybe that's why I can't expect these Soviet propagandists to fall over in shame someday.
We're in junior high school, at the sit-in, at the teach-in, at the rally-in, at the march, at the election. They hope we'll never catch on to that simple bit of Henny Youngman wisdom. They live in fear that we will catch on to that one line. Compared to what? You see, they want to stampede us because the government of, for example, El Salvador would have made Thomas Jefferson unhappy in many of its activities. Oh, so forget them. They are the irredeemable monster of all time, and we want them overthrown. Who is out to overthrow them? Forget about that. You're going to defend these evil, corrupt people? And then along comes, here, Charlie, of El Salvador.
Well, as the great philosopher of our time, Henny Youngman always says when he's asked about his wife, compared to what?